All right, we're still starting. That's bizarre. Well, we're back, but we're waiting for the broadcast to start. Oh, there we are. And we're back officially. There we go. A little bit of delay time on the broadcast. More COMP2068 Advanced Web Programming here at Georgian College, and it's Week 10, Lesson 10, Part 3. We just finished watching the first part of shaping up with Angular on the AngularJS website, right? I want to get into the meat and bones of things, with some of the stuff we're going to be doing today. And there are going to be some dependencies. I'm going to follow this PowerPoint presentation that I've already got up on Blackboard. All right, so let me bring it up for you. It's called Lesson 10, Intro to Angular, Part 1. I didn't get through the whole thing this morning because there's some, it's pretty long. It's 53 slides. We have some time to do it, but there's some other piece parts to it that I want to get into with you. And I want to make sure that everyone's in line with what I'm talking about, because I'm going to repeat some of the steps we took last week when I used TypeScript and when I used, the dependency manager Bower. I want to repeat some of those steps so that way we can see them again, right? So you're not, it's not so new to you. You've seen it a couple times. Also, remember that week 12 and week 13 of this course, you're not going to have teaching weeks for those 2 weeks, right? Those are 2 weeks that I'm giving you, that's 6 hours that you can spend in class working on your project. So it's in-class project hours. Now, like I said before, traditionally what happens is people run away. I never see them again, right? Until the exam, right? Please, that is not a good thing to do. I'm giving you those 2 sessions. I'll be here physically for you, so to help you troubleshoot and get you through some rough spots, and also give you some feedback and tell you how you're doing, right? When I look at your stuff, right? So please don't take off and not be in those during those 2 days on week 12 and week 13. So not next week, but the week after is when we're going to start that off. So 2 weeks of workshop weeks where you kind of come in and use your tools, working with your partners. Now, some people say I can't work in class, Tom, because it's too loud, right? Can I go to a breakout room and work there? You can, right? It's really up to you how you manage your time during those 2 weeks. But I highly recommend you don't skip off, right? That would be very bad, right, for you. And it's your money. You're paying for this course, right? So I want you to get the most out of it. Let's talk about Intro to Angular a little bit. And I want you to fire up your Visual Studio Code, because that's what we're going to be using today again, right, when we do this kind of stuff. So what we're going to be doing, and by the way, a lot of this comes right from the book, that I'm following the book's examples for this, right? We're going to understand the key concepts of AngularJS today. We're going to talk about that. We're also going to talk about Bower as a front-end dependency manager again, right? How it does that. We're going to install and configure Angular, right, in our app. We got that done today in the first class. And we're going to create and organize our application a little differently, because the way they do things on Code School with your little, the way they teach you on Code School is going to be slightly different than the way we do it, because we have a back end, and we have to make sure that by the end you're able to connect with Express, right, Mongo, and Node, right? So that's going to be a little bit different than what they do. So we're going to talk about Angular's MVC architecture, because it does that as well. It's all about MVC. And then eventually, by next week, I'd like to try and implement this authentication with Angular and the whole mean stack. Okay, so it's going to be like the next level, just trying to authenticate somebody with Angular. Which means taking our little application I built 2 weeks ago when I showed you authentication with Express. I want to do that with Angular. So kind of use that application that we had as a kickoff point, right, for our work. Okay, so let's talk about Angular a little bit and discuss what it's all about, right? So Angular, again, just like Greg said on the video, is a front-end framework, right? So it's not something that you can use part of, but not all of. And the reason why I'm saying that is it's opinionated. It's not a glue framework. Okay, a glue framework is like I can choose some parts of it to use and leave the rest. Okay, it's not like that for this one. You're doing Angular, it makes sense to do Angular all the way on the front end, not partly, right? What Angular does, again, it extends the functionality of HTML, right, using attributes that bind JavaScript to HTML. That's what it does. And again, what we do is we use client-side templating that uses two-way data binding, which is a little bit different than what we do things in EJS. Remember, EJS is one-way data binding, right? It doesn't use live, kind of like a live code. It's not live when you change something in EJS. As we get going, you can see that Angular can be quite difficult. I'm also going to show you how to use TypeScript for code hinting. That's what I want to do, and for tooling. I'm not going to use TypeScript to create our own classes and objects necessarily today, just for code hinting is what I want to use it for. IntelliSense. So again, we're going to talk about two-way data binding a little bit, and how things get a little bit more complicated as we make larger applications. So when we load the core module of Angular, right, everything you need is loaded in there, right? In order for us to bootstrap, remember, not Twitter bootstrap. When I say bootstrap in this kind of context, I mean how to add Angular functionality to your HTML application, your static site. How do I add it? When I add it on, I'm bootstrapping the application on. That's what I'm doing. That's what the lingo means. Angular comes with this global object, also wraps a leaner subset of jQuery, if you know jQuery already, called JQLite. JQLite, and it includes all of these methods from jQuery, right? So lots of methods. If you know jQuery, then we use JQLite. So that's why jQuery and Angular really play well together, because it's using a lot of the same code that we're using in jQuery. Okay, and again, we use static methods of Angular to create, manipulate, and edit basic entities. We'll talk about those later on as we go. But in order for us to talk about these, I want to kind of start discussing Angular modules and everything else. I want to kind of kick up Visual Studio Code and create our project for now, so we can start working. And again, this is the lab portion of our day. So let's do that. So first, this morning I created this folder called COMP2068 Lesson 10. We're going to do another one today, new folder, and we're going to call it COMP2068 Week 10, right? Because you guys are the weeks, and the date time is the lesson, right? So Week 10. And up here on GitHub, I'm going to create a new repository there as a placeholder, right? So github.com and /Georgian, right? I'm going to create a new repository on here called COMP2068, and it's Week 10, all right? Week 10. And click Create Repository. There it is. There's my repository. It's empty. It's just a placeholder, right? Now in VS Code, I'm going to bring up VS Code, and I have my code from this morning's class, but what I want to do is I want to drag Week 10 into the right side of VS Code. So now I only have a folder. That's all I have, right? So we got to build this out a little bit, and I want to initialize my Git repository here on the left. But before I do that, I'm going to add in a couple of files. One of them I'm going to add in a new file. I'm going to add a new gitignore file. So let's add that in, gitignore. And I'm going to add some stuff to my gitignore file that I know I want to ignore. What stuff should I add into my gitignore file that you would put in so I don't include on GitHub? Node modules, right? I like that. So node modules. If I was going to use Node, I would use Node modules. And you know what? We're probably going to use Node at some point with this application, right? Or combine the two. So that's a good choice. What else? If I'm a Mac user, what do I include as something that I want to just, kind of not include in my application, my GitHub app? I definitely don't want to include DS store type files, right? Because Mac adds a bunch of DS store files up in your folders, right? So we don't want to include those. Also, I know that if I'm going to use Bower as a dependency manager, I might as well use anything that has to do with Bower components. I want to disclude from our apps. Also, if I program something with Cloud9, if I'm a Cloud9 person, I don't want to include that with our app. So those are the kind of examples of stuff we don't want to include. And we can add other ones, and we will. We'll change this file later on. So if you notice, right, I've got my GitHub, my gitignore file first. Then I want to go here into my icon on VS Code, and I want to initialize my Git repository. What this does is it creates my Git repository. I'm going to add an initial message. I'm going to say initial commit, just like I normally would do if I can spell initial. There we go, and click the checkbox. Right? Now, if you notice, I can't push it because I don't have that configured on the command line, and for that I'm going to right-click here on the sidebar underneath my files, and I'm going to go to Open in Terminal, or if you're a PC person, Open in Command Prompt. Right? This is going to bring up my shell. I'm just going to kill this part. Here's my shell, and it's exactly where I want to be. COMP2068 week 10, right? Now, I also want to include one other file. I know I'm going to use Bower as a dependency manager, right? But I don't want my Bower components to be in Bower components. I want to start encapsulating my code a little better, and it makes more sense that I put my Bower components in a different location. Going along with our Express app that we built last time, we had a folder called public. So let's create our folder structure to mimic what we had from Express, because one day we're going to merge Angular and Express together, and we want them to be compatible, right? So let's do that. So I'm going to right-click here, new folder. I know that I want a folder called public. Clicking the wrong place. Public. Under the public folder, what folders do we have in Express? Do you remember?
Style sheets, images.
You're good. You're good. Style sheets. Right? That's one. Another one would be images, new folder, images. I also have JavaScripts, right? Well, you know what? I also want another one in here called lib. I want to put a new folder in here called lib for libraries. All my libraries are going to live in the lib folder. So I need to describe a new file for Bower to tell Bower that when I have my dependencies come in, I don't want them to go into Bower components. I want them to go into this public lib folder. That's where I want them to go. So how do I do that? In the root of my project down here, I'm going to right-click and I'm going to put a new file that I'm going to call Bower RC. In my Bower RC file, in here, I want to declare an object, right? That I'm going to, if I press Control Space, I'm going to get some options from my object, right? I want a new directory object. And it's not going to be Bower components. I want the directory to be called what? Public lib. That's where everything's going to be in. So public/lib. So this is whenever I install a Bower component, it's going to live there. It's going to live in the Bower or the public lib folder. Now, you might not know this, but whenever I include a public folder in my app, I'm going to start looking in there for everything, including things like index.html, unless I otherwise specify in my Express, right? Just FYI, if you do this when you're using Node, right? So I'm also going to put my index.html in there. So let's do that. So I'm going to go right-click, new file, and I'll say index.html, because that's where my index.html is going to live. Okay, now is a great time to initialize my Bower dependencies. And the way to do that is in my command line, I'm going to click on, I'm going to just type in Bower init, just like we do npm init. And remember that Bower is to npm, like Node is to front-end technologies, right? So let's just kind of accept all the defaults here, right? There we go. Notice that it adds all those in. And now I have something called a bower.json file with all this information about me and my project, right? Okay, cool. So I have this. I need to add in. I want to put this up to GitHub, right? Because I've got a few more changes here. Because I'm kind of creating my my folder structure, right? So I need to be able to connect to GitHub. First of all, I'll save these changes as updated my folder structure. I'll do that here. First, I'll click all these changes to add them all. So I'm not clicking each individual one. I'm clicking up here where it says changes. And now these are all added into my my Git repository, my Git staging area, and I'm going to type in the commit message, which is going to be updated folder structure. Right? That's what that is, and press my checkbox. And now I want to push those changes up, but you notice I can't push because I need to configure that locally. And how do I do that? I go back up online. I grab this little line here, git remote add origin, right, which configures my remote repository. On the command line, I'm going to just kind of paste that in. And then I'm going to say something like this, git push -u for unconditional origin master. And what this is going to do is going to push up my current files up online. Let's take a look and see what that looks like. Like this. That's what you should have online now. So if you want to follow along, if I'm going too quick for you, go online, grab my files from GitHub. Okay, this is good, but you know what? I figured out that maybe in my, if I go back to my files, in my git ignore file, I probably want to ignore something like public lib. I don't want that to go up to GitHub either, right? So let's put that in there. So I'll say public lib. My public lib folders I'm ignoring. That's in my git ignore file. My git ignore file controls what goes up on GitHub. Okay. Yes.
If you do automatic deployment, how do you work around? If you're doing automatic deployment from GitHub, how do you work around not uploading it to GitHub or wanting it to have it?
It installs it for you. It does all the installs. If it knows that if you have a Bower, Bower.json file or a package.json file, it does it all for you. You don't have to load it up. It's a leaner solution than doing it that way, right? Okay. So I've got my files. I've got my folder structure. You know what? I need some stuff inside my index.html, right? So let's get an index.html template that I'm going to get from Bootstrap, Twitter Bootstrap this time. Okay, so I'm going to go up online. I'm going to go to Get Bootstrap, and I'm going to go to Getting Started. And under Getting Started, I'm going to kind of flick down here until I see this like starter page, this basic template. And I'm going to copy this basic template here on the copy, where it says on the right-hand corner. And I'm going to paste it into my VS Code. Right, there it is. I don't need all this. I don't need all this at all. So let's just erase the stuff I don't need. I don't need these comments. And it's just, let me just take this away so you can see more of my stuff. So I don't need this comment here. I'll change from Bootstrap 101 to Angular. That's what it is, Angular 101. I'll get rid of all this stuff, including my CSS link right now. And the same thing goes with all this stuff. I'm not going to use this stuff. I'm going to use stuff in my Bower components, which is going to be under my public lib folder. And instead of hello world, we're going to say hello Angular, right? Because that's the kind of people that we are. In the CSS section now, right, we want to include our Bootstrap CSS. We want to include our font awesome. We don't have that yet, right? We also want to include a file that's our own custom CSS, right? And we don't have those. So let's first of all let's come in here into style sheets. I don't have a style sheet, so I'm gonna in my style sheet folder. I want a new file that I'm going to call app.css, which is where my here's where my custom CSS styles, are housed, if you will. Right, this is where they live. Right. I don't have any custom CSS styles right now, but I've included this app.css in my style sheets folder of my public folder. Okay. Cool. So I've got that piece done. Let's go back to my index.html, and this is where I'm going to add in my CSS section. I'm just going to kind of annotate it right now. So here's my CSS section. Right, this is where it's going to live. I'm going to put all my CSS in there, and underneath here, before my body tag, excuse me, I'm going to put my JavaScript Libraries section. And then further down, I'm probably going to have another section that's for my application JavaScript files, which is different than my libraries. My libraries are libraries that I get from online. And my application-specific files are for me. I make those files, right? Okay, cool. So I've got this little template but I need to add some stuff to it. So of course I'm going to use Bower as my dependency manager. Let me just make this, I'm going to kind of close this up for you guys so you can see it all. There it is. I'm going to use Bower as my dependency manager here in order for me to do that. Right? So I'm going to clear the screen. And now again, some people have Bower working and some people do not have Bower working. Remember that you have to have Git installed properly and you have to have the proper permissions in order for Bower to work. But worst case scenario, if you can't get Bower to work, you can always manually install everything, just like before. Bower is a tool that we use so that it's easier for us to manage our dependencies. So how we use it, we say this, we say Bower install, and again I'm in the root. I made some mistakes this morning, I wasn't in the root. I want to install, I know for sure I want to install Jquery, because I can't do Bootstrap without Jquery. So Jquery is going to come first. I'm going to put -- save and press enter. And what this is going to do is going to go out, grab Jquery from its website and drag it into our files. Let's do the same thing for the other ones. So Bower install Bootstrap. Oh, let's try that again with, I forgot to put -- save. Can I do it again? I certainly can. It's not going to hurt anything if I put -- save. It's just going to add it into my bower.json file, that it's part of my dependencies.
I have the Git not installed.
Yes, I told you some people have that configuration problem. You got to fix your Git installation issue, else you won't be able to do Bower. Okay? Maybe on, I'll come by afterwards and we'll try and fix it. Okay. The next one is I want to install, I know I need to install Bootstrap and Jquery. I also want to install Font Awesome. So I like using Font Awesome as a way of using font icons as opposed to, it's a really nice library for font icons. It looks nice. And it goes nicely with Bootstrap. That's Twitter Bootstrap. So I got that one. I got Font Awesome. Cool, right? And you know what? I know I'm going to make an Angular app, so I might as well add Angular in there too. So I'm going to go, Bower install Angular -- save. So it's going to go out, grab Angular, and put it in the right place. Okay, let's take a look and see what we've done here in our file structure, right? In my lib now, I have Angular, I have Bootstrap, I have Font Awesome, and I have Jquery. This is perfect. This is exactly how I want my dependency manager to work for me, right? So I can organize my files and encapsulate them so that they don't appear as a Bower components folder, right? And they're all nicely organized. Okay, so how do I include my CSS now from my Bootstrap? Because that's the first thing I got to add in. So I got to kind of swim through Bootstrap, and I go Bootstrap, so lib, so public lib, bootstrap dist, CSS, and then bootstrap.min.css. So that's what I got to add in. So I'm going to put a link in there with that path name. Now remember, I'm in public right now. My index.html is in public, right? So I only have to go down to lib. I'm not in the root. My index.html is not in the root in this particular case, right? Remember, I can survive that way because Node looks in the public folder for index.html first. Okay, let's try this out. So I'm going to go into my style sheet here, and I'm going to say my path. So lib, bootstrap, and under that it's going to be dist, and under that CSS, and under that it's going to be bootstrap.min.css. Okay, in order for me to test this is the right link, I can hover over it and notice it says Command or Control click to test. So if I test it, I get the Bootstrap, so I know the link works. That's good. That's kind of a good path, right? If it didn't work, it wouldn't take me there. It would be an error, right? So that's good. Well, along with that, I want to copy this now since I've typed it out one time. I want to add in bootstrap.theme because that's also in the same folder. .min.css, right? And you know what? I might as well add in Font Awesome now. And now Font Awesome is a little bit different than this one. If I go back down here, I go lib, Font Awesome, and under Font Awesome, CSS. There's no dist folder. So lib, Font Awesome, right? And there's no dist, it just goes to CSS. So I just get rid of all this. And then it becomes Font Awesome .min.css, right? Okay, good. And I also want to add in my own CSS files because I want to, just in case I want to modify something, which I probably will. right? So let's type another link in here. And my own CSS files are under public, but they're not under lib, they're under style sheets, app.css. So it's, again, it's style sheets, so I don't have to go into public because I'm in public, right? Style sheets, and then from there, I'm going to go to app.css. So I've got my CSS, and all this stuff is there. It's all connected, right? Let's do the same thing with my JavaScript libraries, right? So the first one I want is Jquery. So again, if I was to look here, right, I know that it's in public lib, right? Jquery dist jquery.min.js. So that's what I'm going to type in. This time, instead of a link, it's going to be a script. So script tag, and I'm going to put a source in there. And my source is going to be, just like I said, it's going to be lib jquery dist and then jquery.min.js. Okay, cool. Let's test that to make sure that's right. So I'm going to command click onto it. Yes, it's good. I've got that file. I can test it that way. And all I've done is just click on the link to make sure it's working. And now I know that if I have jQuery, I need to add Bootstrap, because the first thing I need to do is add jQuery before Bootstrap. So again, it would be under Bootstrap, right? And instead of CSS, it would be JS, right? So let's try this out. So it would be lib. See if I can do this. Bootstrap. And under Bootstrap, it's dist. And under dist, it's JS. And it's not jQuery, it's Bootstrap. Okay, cool. And under Bootstrap, I want to put an Angular. So let's type this out. It's again, I'll copy and paste, and I'll go back in here. It'll be lib Angular, and then right into Angular.js, Angular.min.js, right? So it's lib Angular, and then I can get rid of all this. Angular.min.js. And let's test that out and see if it works. Yay, it's there. So I know these are all my scripts, and I've got my CSS over here, and now there's one more thing I'm missing. I'm missing an app.js file that I'm going to put over here, right? So, but I'm going to put it inside my public folder, in the root of my public folder, my app.js, right? So let's do that. So I'm going to kind of copy and paste. And right here, instead of all this, it's just going to be app.js. Now there is no app.js, right? So if I actually goes to click here, it would give me an error. It'd say, meh, there's no error, there's no app.js, right? So I haven't made that yet. So let's make it. So I'm going to go into public, right click, and new file. But instead of app.js, because I'm a TypeScript guy, I'm a TypeScript ambassador, right? I'm going to put in app.ts. I don't have TypeScript in my files yet, but I want to add them in for code hinting. Now you could choose to follow along with me with TypeScript or ignore it if it's too complex for you. But remember, there's some other dependencies I need to put in to make TypeScript work. One of them, in the root of my folder here, is a new file called tsconfig.json. And notice if I press Control Space, I get this compiler options that come up. I want to type that in, and I want to use a map file, which is going to be a source maps. I'm going to make this true, so I get good code hinting in my browser, right? Not just in my editor, right? Editor, browser. I want the browser to tell me if there's an error, JavaScript error, and where it is. Okay, that's the first thing. I need to then try and compile my TypeScript file. I don't have anything in my TypeScript file right now. Let's put a kind of a little bit of code. So I'll say console.log. I'll say application started. Okay, that's what it's there. But I'm going to press, in order for me to compile, cross-compile, or transpile here in my Visual Studio Code, I've got to do Command-Shift-B. On the PC, it's Control-Shift-B. And remember, there's some problems with the PCs in front of you that we dealt with last week that you have to deal with again. You can always do things via command line as well. So if I press Command-Shift-B, it's going to ask me to configure a task runner, and I want to. My task runner doesn't have to include all this stuff. I'm going to get rid of it, the stuff I don't need. So I'm going to get rid of all this. And all this stuff here on the bottom is going to go. And you know what? I don't need any of these comments, so I'm going to get rid of these comments here. Or this one, or this one, or this one. There we go. Just shoring this up here so we're ready to launch our TypeScript app. Okay, and one thing I need to do is get rid of this hello world.ts. I don't need that. And save. Now, if I press Command-Shift-B and my system is configured properly, like we talked about last week, then I should be able to transpile from TypeScript into JavaScript, which is right there. So there's my JavaScript transpile. So if I look at TypeScript here, and if I split screen, I can see that my JavaScript is transpiled here with a source map URL. TypeScript, JavaScript. Remember that I'm only using TypeScript for code hinting. I'm not going to build my own classes and modules right now, right? So let me show you how to do that. First of all, let us upload to GitHub for those people who weren't able to keep up. There's a lot of stuff I just did there. Actually, before I do that, let's add in some dependencies for TypeScript. Because remember, I want to get TypeScript, I want to get code hinting on Angular and Jquery, right? So in order for me to do that, I got to add some typings for that, type definition libraries, and I do that through the command line. So I say, so tsd is the command line. Remember we installed that last week. tsd install, and we're going to say jQuery -- save. And what this does is it goes and grabs the latest type definition library from jQuery and includes it inside my file, as well as it creates this tsd.json file here that kind of shows me the dependencies for jQuery in my project. So this is a typings dependency now that I'm doing. Okay, let's go back and add in the other dependencies. I also need a dependency tsd install Angular, right? Because I need Angular JS to come in as something I want to use too. So it goes out, grabs Angular, and populates it in my files. So now I have two typings. One of them is for Angular, and the other one is for jQuery. Notice I have 13 updates, but I don't want these typings to go up online. And that doesn't make any sense, right? So I'm going to go into my gitignore file again, and on the right here, I'm going to put in typings and save. And notice how, if on the left, it goes down by a bunch, because I don't need all those files. So typing's got to be part of my gitignore file, because I'm not going to send those up to GitHub, right? All I need is my tsconfig file and my tsd.json file, so that they tell me what I need in my code. Okay, we're getting there. Okay, this is a great place to upload to GitHub. I've got 10 changes that I made just now, right? And did very quick. I'm going to go here next to changes and click the plus button in Visual Studio Code. When I click the plus button, it adds all my changes to the staging area. Now I create a message for it, and I say added front end web technologies. That's what I did, right? And then I'm going to kind of click this, go to my ellipses, and push. And I'm going to push that up to GitHub. And when it's done pushing, if I look at GitHub now, I have this on GitHub, all this stuff. So you can see, if you go up there now, you're going to see all these things I got going on GitHub. One more thing before we go on from this piece, I got to test it. Right? I've done all this stuff, right? I don't even know if my site works right now. I've just added all this stuff together, banged it all together, right? So let's test it out. I'm going to say http-server, that little mini node server that I've downloaded to NPM. I'm going to use that. I press enter. So it's going to serve my files up on 8080, port 8080. So I'm going to go to localhost, port 8080, and if I did everything well, then bam, hello Angular. Right, let's check to see if I've got any issues. So I'm going to right click here and look at my inspect element to see if there's any problems in my console. So far, nothing. I even have application started. We're all good to go, right? Speaking of which, though, here's my application started, right? And again, this TypeScript that goes to over here. Let's try a little bit of Angular, because this is what this whole thing is about, yeah? Angular and getting feedback, code hinting with TypeScript. Let's try this out. So here's the example. Angular, so var app we're going to make an app, right, is equal to Angular. Oh wait, how come I'm not getting code hinting for Angular, right? Well, the reason why is because it hasn't had a time to propagate, right? I have my TypeScript, right? I have TypeScript, but I need to make sure that Angular, so var app is equal to Angular, and if it's not there, don't worry about it for a second, dot module, and in my module, my module is going to be called app, and I'm going to pass in an empty array. This is the format for Angular, right? I'll transpile that one for a second and see what we get on this side. Same thing, right? When I take from TypeScript and go to Angular, same. And now you see my problems went away here. Let's do this. If I hover over app, it says any. Well, because it doesn't know what Angular is right now yet. It will. Sometimes what I need to do with whether it's Visual Studio Code or Visual Studio 2015 Community Edition, the big one, right? Sometimes I need to close these off to get that code hinting happening properly. And also, I should also check my TSD. TSD's got Angular in there, my Jquery, d.ts. And I've got my typings. These are the ones that I have for Jquery and Angular. They're right here. Notice that there's declarations for everything else. It just takes time to propagate sometimes. Okay. Other things to check. So I've got my public app.ts file. Here it is, right? And the next thing I want to do with Angular, right, is I want to bootstrap my file. So index.html, I want to add in my language is equal to English next to there, I want to add in a directive, which is ng-app. Notice how I get good code hinting from Visual Studio Code. And of course, I'm going to call this thing app. Now, in order for us to test to see that Angular is working and that we're good to go, I'm going to go down here and I'm going to put in some mustaches. That's what those are called, right? Not the mustache that's on my face, but these mustaches, right? And go something like this, some kind of division. So 20 divided by 3, right, to get an answer. And you know what? Let's wrap that in a container tag. So I'm going to say a div tag with a class of container. Right, that's a Bootstrap thing, right? And you know what? Just to be nice, I'm going to right-click anywhere on this page and click Format Code just to format my HTML a little nicer and save. So I've used automatic bootstrapping up here, just like we're going to learn in the video, to add Angular to my code. And then down here, I'm actually having an expression happen right here next to my h1 tag. Let's put it below the h1 tag. Let's wrap that into a paragraph. So I'm going to say, let's put a paragraph tag together. And I'll put this expression inside the paragraph. So it lives somewhere. Okay, let's see if it works. So how do I do that? I have to go back to my localhost and refresh. And if I'm good, then I get this answer, 6.666667. You should get that if Angular is working. If Angular is not working, you're going to get the mustaches and 20 divided by 3. That's what you're going to get, right? And what do I mean by that, by the way? I mean, if I go back here, right, and I take away the bootstrapping up here completely, I'm going to take this off, right, and I save, and I go back to here, and I refresh, I get 20 divided by 3. Because Angular is not active on this page. Even though I've included it down in the bottom, I still need to bootstrap my application and add, there's 2 ways I can do it. Like I said before, I can do it automatic with the ng-app directive, right? So going back to here, here's my ng-app directive, which is equal to app. That's one way. Or I could do it manually with code, which is what we're going to do later on. Okay, so again, I've added Angular, I've added TypeScript. Let's do another little update to my thing. I'll say added Angular and TypeScript. Cool. And I'm going to update that on GitHub. And you should have the update now. Good. And if I go down here, as an example, if I run it again in my thing now, I've reactivated Angular, it's back to normal, 6.66667. So it allows me to do this, and it also allows me to do other kinds of expressions, like Greg said in his video, right? So an example of this would be, let's make another section tag now. And my section tag, I want to add more mustaches, right? Where I do a string, right? Tom, right? Plus is typing too fast, right? And then followed by the mustaches. I'm injecting content into my page. By the way, as I said earlier in the early class today, that's one of the criticisms of Angular, because we have really cool two-way data binding on one hand, but on the other hand, we also have this content injection, which is like, hold on, why are we doing that? Why are we injecting content? Let's check that out and see what it does in the web page. See, it goes 66667, and then Tom is typing too fast, right? It actually concatenated those two strings together, right? So Tom plus is typing too fast, concatenates to Tom is typing too fast inside this expression, Angular expression. Okay. So again, here's my module, app.ts, right? And one thing I was worried about was that Angular, if I go Angular, right, I'm not getting any kind of code hinting for it. How come, right? And sometimes it's because of the way that Angular has been allowed in. Like, for example, in my first class, I had issues with my type definition libraries, my typings. And under my typings, I should have a tsd.d.ts file, which gives me this reference path, right? Sometimes, I'm just letting you know, that I have to type in this jQuery, jQuery.d.ts, inside my application itself, right? In order for me not to have my code hinting. Now remember that I'm sitting inside of app.ts, which is inside public, and my typings is outside of public, right? So I have to go up one, and then down into typings, and down into my Angular JS. So my reference path would be like this. If I was going to type it by hand, reference path, right? And then I need to put this angle bracket, sorry. Reference path equals to, right? And then the path of my reference for my angular.d.ts file, which is up one, down into typings, right? And then down into AngularJS. And then down into angular.d.ts. And if I've done everything correctly, then the path will be correct, right? And I got to check my path. It says invalid reference directive set syntax. And to check this, if I'm not wrong, if I'm wrong with the reference that I've got in here, I got to go back to my, I should look at my references, which is like this, reference path equals to, it looks, oh, backslash would be nice too. How about that? How about them apples? I should probably put everything in the right way, huh? Yeah? Now, if I've done everything correctly, I should be able to get Angular coding. So I've said Angular now I'm getting code hinting, right? Sometimes you need to turn it off, turn it on. It doesn't automatically detect my tsd.d.ts file that's inside my typings file. It happens. So in order for me to override, I can just type in the reference myself. Same thing for jQuery. If I want to get jQuery hinting, and again it would be, remember how jQuery works, it'll be jQuery document, and then if I don't get the ready, I'm okay with it. I'm good. This is good. I'm getting jQuery hinting. jQuery is working, but not Angular. It's okay. Okay, good. Now that I got my code hinting, right? I want to hover over my app, and I can see that my app has a there's type inference working on my app. It says it's of type ng.imodule, which is an interface. So I could create a typing for this thing. I can say ng.imodule, and whenever you see ng in the reference of Angular, it stands for Angular. Ng is Angular. If you see ng on a bumper sticker, that means Angular, right? Angular module. Okay, so that's cool, right? So that's kind of the stuff that we can do with our Angular module. And we're getting code hinting, like I said. So if I start typing module, or if I hover over stuff, it says, look, it says the Angular module is global place for creating, registering, and retrieving Angular modules. That's all the stuff that I get from my code hinting now, that I've enabled this little line, right? Because I wasn't getting that somehow with my application. So you can do it manually too. Okay, cool. Let's get back to the PowerPoint. Questions before I move on. So recap a little bit, right, and give you guys a chance to catch up. One, my index.html, the way I've broken it out, right? It lives, notice it lives in my public folder, right? If I stop debugging here for a second, if I stop serving, if I do a list, notice I have a bower.json, a public, a tsconfig, a ts.json, and a typings file here in the root of my folder, but I don't have an index.html. Normally I would have my index.html in or some kind of index.ejs, if you guys remember, in my views folder. I don't have a views folder and I'm not running Express, right? So it's just looking inside my public folder automatically when I'm running http.server. That's what it does. That's why I've configured it this way. Because in the future, we're not going to have an index.html in the root either. We're going to have an index.ejs or something else inside our views folder, right? So that's why I'm doing it now, right? Okay, yes?
Can I manually move Bower components into the public folder without breaking
No.
anything?
You have to use that Bower RC file.
I did, and it didn't work, so that's why.
Didn't work?
Yeah.
Okay, I'll come around and fix it
Yeah.
for you. Because basically what Bower RC does, if you go to Bower RC, you have to specify the directory as public lib. If you do this, typically it'll work.
Yeah.
And you have to do a Bower init. If you do that Bower init, it should know where to go. But if it insisted on installing Bower components, something's wrong. Okay, so we got to fix that. Okay, so so I've got my application running, right? It's very small and doesn't do much right now, but we do have an Angular app, right? Let's go back to this, or not this. Let's go back to this. And we're talking about Angular modules a little bit. Remember, so from a general form perspective, when we declare a module, right, we do this, angular.module, the name of the module, what it requires in these square brackets, and the config function. And a lot of times what we do is we put in the config function and what it requires in square brackets. So that way we protect against minification problems. So name is the name of the module, requires is an array of strings of all the dependencies, and config function is whatever the config function is going to run to configure the module. Angular uses a lot of external modules, and one of the ones we're going to add in later on is something called ng-root, or angular-root. And the reason why is we want to be able to do some routing with Angular, not just with Express, when it comes to templating. We want to be able to template with Angular. And now, I recently had the question was like, how do we know what template engine we want to use? Do we use Express? Do we use Angular? Do we use both? How do we do that? And the answer is, you should only use Angular, right? When we do a front-end framework like Angular, we don't need Express, right? Because Express, the only views that you'll have is the views from Angular. Angular is going to be your new view engine, right? So we'll remove those components out of Express when we come back to that. We won't need a view engine anymore. Because it's kind of confusing. I mean, you could serve up the server-based views on Express, and you could use Angular for all the front-end stuff. You could split it up between server and client, or private and public, whatever you want to say, right? There's also instances of that I've seen. But typically we use one view engine and one routing engine or the other. So this idea of two-way data binding is part of Angular's core functionality, right? Two-way data binding. But to understand what that is, we have to look at one-way data binding. So this is kind of like an example of one-way data binding, which is very similar to what we see in Express. We have our template, we have our model or the data, the business logic. We smash those things together and we produce a view. That's one-way data binding, exactly how we do things with EJS, right? Logic, we have our template, bam, we have a view, right? But it doesn't go back the other way. Once we've created a view, it's static, it's there, it's done, right? What two-way data binding allows us to do is we create our template, we generate our view, but it's constantly connected with the model. So anytime there's a change in the model, it's reflected instantly on the view, like a live view, right? So an example of that would be if I had a survey site and I had an active survey and I was actually on the survey list page, right? And then let's say Victoria went and added another survey, right? Even though I'm looking at the page, bam, it would just update. My page would instantly be a live view. I wouldn't have to reload the page. It would be reloaded for me because it's got two-way data binding with, using Angular. So this is a great thing, and people really criticize it as well, right? Sometimes they don't want that functionality. They want you to refresh the page. So for those two reasons, sometimes they don't like two-way data binding. It's been criticized, right? So there's some front-end modules, front-end frameworks out there that don't do two-way data binding because they do it on purpose. They don't want two-way data binding. But let's talk about what a dependency injection is now. So a dependency injection is like we want to add in a dependency to my file. And this is a great example of a JavaScript class. And we talked about this last day. And notice that the syntax is a little funny for us to understand that it's a class. If you were to look at this, there's no class keyword anywhere. Because remember that JavaScript uses prototypical inheritance. It doesn't use a class-based object-oriented design, right? So how do we deal with this? Well, if you notice at the top, this part here where it says var notifier is equal to this anonymous function, that is like your constructor for your class, right? A regular function. Then we have this declared instance variable called user service, which is of type new user service. Now there is no user service in JavaScript. You have to imagine that there's a user service class somewhere up the chain, all right, for this to be using right now. And that's why there's a green underline, right? It means there is no real, I don't know about user service, right? So what I'm doing is I'm saying, well, I'm generating a new user service, but I'm not linking to anything outside of my constructor. So how useful is this? It's not a dependency anymore. I'm creating a new object inside of my constructor, which is independent of anything outside of my constructor. This is not dependency injection, right? I have a problem. If I was going to try and do one of these, user is equal to this user service get user, I don't have anything that's defined inside my user service right now because I just defined it right now. This is a new object. If I want to link back to the user that I created in a user service somewhere outside of this class here, this isn't the way to do that, right? I need to have dependency injection, and the way to do that, of course, is to write it like this, right? So I have my notifier class, and I pass in a reference to something called user service, whatever that is, right? Remember that the difference between passing in an object and some kind of simple object like a value, string or an integer or whatever, it's the difference between reference, passing by reference, and passing by value. When I pass by value, I only specify the value that I'm sending into the constructor. When I pass by reference, I'm actually passing the memory location that I'm repointing to, right? So it's the actual object that I'm getting. And that's what dependency injection is all about. I pass a reference to the object into my constructor. That's what I'm doing when I use dependency injection. So I can actually access this object that's been predefined and configured outside of my constructor here inside my notifier class. And then I can use my notify method, which we use the prototype keyword to define, right, in JavaScript, to access the user service, get the information from the service, and attach it to a new user object, right? And then I can say, well, if user role is admin, right? And notice that I use triple equals. Double equals is truthsy, falsy, right? Triple equals is exactly equal. That's what it means. Double equal means if I have a 1, like a literal 1, and I have a 1 in quotations, double equals would kind of like simplify that and say that they're equal, right? The evaluation for those two things, 1, like the actual number 1, and 1 in brackets, when I put equal, is the same. If I put triple equals, it means, no, I want not just the value, but also the type. I'm listening for the type to be a string of admin, right? That's why we use triple equals when we do checks a lot of times in JavaScript. We want to be very strict to prevent errors. So this is an example of dependency injection. I'm injecting a reference to this object here in the constructor of the class. Now it's hard to see it here because it doesn't say class anywhere. So I've added in a TypeScript version to show you the difference. Here's TypeScript, if I was going to write the notifier class in TypeScript, I'd write it like this. Class notifier. I have a public user service instance variable, right, which is of type user service. It's a little bit funny, right? My constructor takes in a user service, a reference to a user service object, right? And by the way, this is, I could have written it with, I could have typed the user service as a user service, capital U, right, like this. And then I say this.user service is equal to user service. I'm passing in a reference to the user service object into my constructor. And then here my method, my notify method, which returns void, I take a user, which is of type user, because there's going to be a user type that has roles and a name, maybe, and something else. And I'm assigning the value that I get from the user service get user method, right? So this is an example of TypeScript. So to me, this is a little cleaner. I have a class, I have a constructor, I have a method. Same thing. So dependency injection then is the ability for us to pass in a reference to the dependencies inside of our module. Let's write this one. This is a module that we want to write, Angular module. And notice how I name the module some module, right? And then I chain a method, the controller method, alongside the module. So here's, I'm using object chaining here, and this is something that's part of JavaScript and other C-style languages, right? Where I can do object chaining, right? So I start off with this one, this dot notation, and then I go to this next one, and this method controller is a method of the module, right? And if I was to type that here in TypeScript, I go back to public, and I go back to app.ts. So here I define a controller. I could do that. I can say dot controller, right? See how it comes up and the beautiful typing that I get? Yes. And I can name the controller, like, you know, my controller. You have to have the controller. The name controller should be in your my controller name as a convention, right? Comma, and then whatever my callback function is going to be, right? Which is going to be some kind of function that returns that is the controller function. This is the actual constructor function for the controller. Notice in the example here, I also pass in something called scope. And the controller, Angular, has an object called scope, right? And what scope does is it creates an object that can carry forward or create new instance variables and so on by using the scope variable name. Let's go back. So I can do that. I can pass in scope, and Angular would know what that is. If I hover over these things, I can see what all of these things are if I get good code hinting. So there's my controller. I hover over this. This is going to be an anonymous function with scope. Notice scope is any, because I haven't defined what scope is. Okay, so that's what it would look like when I define a module with a controller, right, in Angular. We're not there yet. So I'm going to undo that. I wanted to show it to you so you see what it looks like. And by the way, it's identical to JavaScript. I'm not changing anything right now. I'm not making TypeScript do anything different for us right now. The only thing I want from TypeScript in this instance is code hinting, is tooling for me to make it easier for me to write Angular, not for me to rewrite Angular or to change something. Okay? I'm just going to do that because I don't need any of that stuff for now. Okay, let's go back. So again, I inject when I inject stuff, a dependency. Usually my constructor function that I'm injecting it into is called the injector, right? It's another name for it. So sometimes we have a problem when we create a controller. Here's an example of a controller, and whatever you want to call it, my controller, some controller. And when you have a function that you want to pass into, like I said, because of minification, you don't want to just pass in the anonymous function by itself. You want to pass it inside of an array, right? So that way it protects against minification. So this is the right way to write that module, right? With a controller, with this square bracket stuff. The square bracket says that scope is a dependency, and I'm passing the scope dependency into the controller constructor. That's what this function is right here. It's a controller constructor function. Whew. Okay. Let's talk about directives a little bit in this crazy train we're on. So again, we talked about Angular, that it extends HTML, right? And we talked about Angular directives as markers, and so did Greg on that code school video. He said Angular directives are markers, that they can usually show up as attributes inside HTML tags or the element themselves, and we can actually write our own custom directives. So an example would be if I had something called a user list. I brought this up in first class as well. I could put it in a section element or in a div tag or something like that, right? But wouldn't it be nicer in HTML if I could extend HTML and make it my own? So I create a user list element. I could do that in HTML. My user list element then will define a user list. It has a better contextual meaning than just a div tag or a section tag, right? And I can do that with Angular directives. We won't do that right now, but maybe we'll hit it later on in the course. Okay, and we also talked about core directives, and that ng-app was one of the core directives. And again, this is an example of how we bootstrap in an automatic way by putting the ng-app in different places, right? Right now, our ng-app is, if you look at our back to Visual Studio Code, right? If I go back to my index.html, my ng-app appears at the top of my file in the HTML element. So this means that everything inside my document is affected by Angular, right? If I want to remove this piece, right? If I take it off and I go back down here and I say, well, you know what? I want to put it in this section tag. So here's my section, right? So Tom is typing too fast. Well, I mean, this should not work now, right? Because it's not inside this context. It won't work here anymore, right? And let me show you that. So if I refresh, I see that, well, first of all, I got to run my server. How about that, apples? If I refresh, I get this. I get Tom is typing too fast. That worked, right? But I don't get this calculation because this expression is outside of the ng-app directive, right? If I go back to the directive, I can see that ng-app now is inside my section. So only this stuff that's in here is going to be affected. Outside of there, there's no Angular, right? So that's why it's important that we bootstrap Angular either through our documentation or through our document scope, or at least at the very minimum, if we're going to use it anyway, we should put it on our body tag. So we can put it here as well, here or here. So body tag or the HTML tag up here. Now if you notice, if I go back and I refresh, and I got my answer again, right? My Angular's working, okay? Again, whenever we see expressions, in order for the expression, the double mustache curly brace, to be evaluated, Angular has to be bootstrapped within that element, all right? Okay. So there's some core directives that you're going to see a lot. ng controller, that we're going to see a lot, which tells the compiler which controller class to use for business logic. Okay. ng model is the way we, it's placed on input elements and binds the input value to a property on the model. All right. So an example would be if I had a name property on the model, and I wanted to do that two-way data binding, right, back to the model, and I want to put that inside of some kind of input element or some kind of label or something, and I want it to automatically update, live update when something changes in my model, in my database, right? That's what the ng model directive will allow me to do. There's also something called ng show and ng hide, and what you can do with this is you can evaluate a Boolean expression. So and say something like this, ng show equals to, and in quotations, a Boolean expression. For example, is available is equal to true, right? If is available is equal to true, then show or hide this element and anything that's contained in the element. So you can actually hide or show whole sections of text. A good example of this would be is if you use the ng hide or ng show when you're logging in, right? So I only want to show my login and register if I'm not already logged in, right? I don't want to show my login or register link if I'm already logged in and authenticated, right? So I would do an ng-show is authenticated, let's say, right? ng repeat is another common one, and what it does is it allows you to iterate over and over again, using the stuff that we get from our ng controller, Angular controller, right? So we get some information from Angular controller, like let's say for example a list of data, and I want to iterate across that data inside of a list item or an unordered list as an example. And I can do that with the ng repeat, just like we do with the directive that we use for in our EJS. We can put these angle bracket %, right, for loop, right, whatever the for loop is, and then angle % angle bracket, and anything in there, right, will repeat as if I'm running a for loop, right? It's the same thing. This repeatable area can be created with ng repeat. So those are very common directives that you're going to see over and over again with Angular. Okay, we talked about bootstrapping a lot, and there's two ways: automatic and manual. Automatic, we've seen. It looks like ng app somewhere in the flow. Let's do it manual. And manual, the general form looks like this: angular.bootstrap. That's the actual command. The element that we're targeting, so that's where it's going to be. So an example, if it was going to be the entire document, it would be document. That would be the element. If it was just in the body, it would be body, right? Modules, whatever modules are the dependencies we want, and config, a configuration for our Angular Bootstrap. And usually what we want to do is put that inside of a document.ready. Skip over this because we've already done that. So let's type this. Let's go into app.js, and I want you to try typing this into your app.js, please. So app.js or app.ts if you're following me on TypeScript. Let's go in there and type var main application module name is equal to mean, and then this is an example of manually bootstrapping your application. We're getting close to the place I left off earlier today in the first class. I know that you guys are glazing right now, and I'm only going to cover up to here. Next week, I'm going to go into more details, right? But today, I just want to give you kind of a high-level view of how to connect Angular. We wanted to look at those things, our Bower dependency manager again, and TypeScript to give us good code hinting, all the tools we need to create a good workflow for our Angular app development lifecycle. I'm getting us to type this because I want you to see what if you're using TypeScript, you should be seeing some code hinting right now when you start typing it in. And here's a question for you. What type is main application module name? What's the type for it? What's the closest type that you would see? How about a string? Would it be a string? Name? Mean? It looks like a string to me. So you would put in colon, if you were using TypeScript, colon string for code hinting. Okay, let's try it out. So I'm going to start typing it out for you guys now. So again, var main application module name is equal to mean. Let's try this out. So I'm going to go into my app.ts or app.js and remove this stuff for now. I'll keep the reference path. And I'll start typing it in. Var application module name, right? Application module name, is that what I said? Or is that main application module name? There we go. Even further than that. Ooh. Main application module name, and this is right from the book, is equal to, first of all, I want to type it as a string, right? Is equal to main. And then I want to do another one, var main application module, then, right? This is where we use that Angular stuff, angular.module, and we're going to pass in a reference to the name. Notice I'm getting code hinting here, right? So I'm going to say main application module name. I can choose that, which is of type string, plus some kind of expression that we're going to use of an empty array expression that we're going to pass in eventually. So that's kind of step 2. So I'm getting code hinting, and if I look at this, I can see that this is of type ng.imodule, like we saw before. So I could explicitly type this thing, just like we would in Java or in C#. So ng imodule. That's the type it is. Again, it helps us because if I was to do anything with main application module from now on, an example of this would be this. If I start typing main application module, I can type. And if I said dot, I have a bunch of things I can do with my main application module that I would never have known. Right? It gives me code hinting to see what I can do, like provider or whatever, or config, animation, constant, all kinds of stuff that comes bundled with this main application module. Right? Like controller, I can define a controller for it if I wanted to. Separate, on a separate line. Alright, and what's the next piece? So I've done this piece. Now I got to do this element document.ready function, right? So this is kind of weird. I go Angular, right, dot element, right, and I'm targeting the document, right, dot ready. And what this actually is doing is creating a event handler, right, to wait for the document to load before it bootstraps our application. So that's what this is really saying. This is saying, you know, there's some comments. Wait for document to load before bootstrapping Angular application. That's what it's doing, right? So when the document actually loads, which means when the web page finishes loading, so we don't have blocking behavior again, right? Then I can actually do my next piece, which is Angular.bootstrap, and it's going to ask for the element name, right? So document, I'm going to bootstrap from the document level, and then the name of my my main application module name, which is what I'm going to put in there in square brackets. So main application module name, and it gives me nice code hinting for that effect. So what I'm doing here is, okay, now after the page is loaded, now bootstrap the Angular app. Here I declare the module, the module, right, the main app module. So declare Angular module. That's what I'm doing here. That's my declaration. This is actually doing the manual bootstrapping right here. Right? I'll say manually bootstrap. Manually bootstrap the Angular app after the page is loaded. Okay, let's run this thing to make sure it works. First I'll transpile, right? And I got some errors, right? I got all kinds. Right? I got 5 errors, 99 warnings, and it says the left-hand side for the for statement must be typed in string array any in Angular Dimensions. I don't care about that. That's just that's errors in Angular. But let's go back and try it online here and see what happens. If I refresh, right? So I refresh, I get this. Man, how come? I know why, right? I get this uncaught exception in injector module error. And I'm getting that because I failed to change my index.html. I already have what's we call it, an ng directive up here, Angular directive, ng app, that's bootstrap my app and called it app. And now I'm doing it again when I hit this line. This is where I bootstrap my application, right? I don't want to do it twice. And it's 2 different names. One is called app, the other one's called main. That's totally messed up. So let's just take this one away. So we don't need that anymore. Because remember, we're targeting the document element as where my bootstrapping, when I connect Angular, that's where I'm connecting it to. The document root. Okay, so if I take this away and I refresh, now I'm back to normal. And there's no more errors. Let's go back into our GitHub. We made a lot of changes here. And I'm going to update my app.ts. So I'm going to say update all. And I'll say added manual bootstrapping. and then I'm gonna kind of push this up. There we go. So what have we done so far? I've used AngularJS, right, and TypeScript inside my app.ts file, and I'm only using it for code hinting, right? So here's my app.ts file. My app.js file, if I was to look at it again, right, just in cross-compatible fashion, right? I'm just going to close this up. Notice that it's identical, right? There really isn't anything different. The only thing I don't do is I don't care about these typings in on the JavaScript side. It keeps everything, keeps the reference, it keeps the comments, everything else gets transferred over when I transpile, right? The only thing that doesn't happen is all these typings disappear. Almost done. So we talked about manual bootstrapping, and next week what we're going to get into is, we haven't finished this, we're on page 30 here of the thing. We're going to talk about MVC entities, where we get into things like controllers and views and models. We'll talk about those a little bit. Each of the PowerPoint slides, the sections, are color-coded, so you can tell that there's different code, like different things. We're talking about views, and there's another one that's going to talk about controllers and scopes, and there's another one that's going to be talking about routing, right? We're going to stop at routing for this section, but in the next section, we're going to get into services and how Angular can use our Express app as a service to consume, right? Because Express is going to provide the data. Our Angular is going to take that data and spin it using two-way data binding to create our view, right, in their browser. Questions around this? I know it might be a little bit foggy to you all now because we're doing Angular for the first time. But if you follow the lab, remember your lab is due next week, Wednesday at midnight. The lab, which is up online, up on Georgian, right? And let's see if it's on Blackboard. If I actually have Blackboard up again. No, I don't. If I go up on Blackboard and if I look at the lab, that's due next week. So I'm going to look at one of these sections are the same. And if I look at assignments, the lab 3 is worth 2.5%. It's follow the Shaping Up with Angular free video training at http://campuscodeschool.com courses blah blah blah, and modify your store and make it your own with your own products. All right, so add in, like I said, plushies and mass destruction, something else. This is due next week, Wednesday at midnight for 2.5%. Please take care of your training so when we come together next week, we'll have a great conversation about Angular. All right? Otherwise, that's it for me. See you next week.